So there's a report called the Time to Change Report that was published by Aston University's Center for Research in Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship. It never gets easier every time I say it. It talks about how there's no lack of ambition when it comes to our ethnic minority-owned businesses in the UK. A lot of the respondents within that report found that things like racism or discrimination or, like I say, that prejudice side of things affected their entrepreneurial journeys. The report talks about how if we better support ethnic minority-owned businesses across the UK, we can, sorry, I always get this wrong, not triple, quadruple the annual contribution of ethnic minority-owned businesses to the economy.
Lesson, welcome to Trampoline Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you for making the time to come down. I know you've got a busy week. Moving back to Cardiff, I believe. Yeah.
Yes, busy. I've realised that I have more shoes than I thought I had, so.
That's always the problem, isn't it?
Exactly.
For those watching who don't know who you are and what you do, tell us a little bit about what Blessing does and
Absolutely. So in my day role, I'm the Business Inclusion Program Manager at NatWest. As of soon, actually, in a few days, I will also be moving to the Cardiff Hub. So I will be the Acceleration Manager for the NatWest Accelerator Cardiff Hub after I finish my current role. Outside of work, I'm a lover of life. I love to travel, love to, just explore and learn new information. And then through that, I have a gift concierge side hustle as well, which I do in addition to everything else that I spend my time on. So that's me.
Okay. And so you've built a career dedicated to breaking down barriers for ethnic minority entrepreneurs. So what made you get into that? Because you could have gone into anything. You could have become an entrepreneur yourself and just said, that's it, that's enough for me. But you decided you wanted to actually help others through the barriers. So what made you get into that?
So it happened by accident, but it was one of the best accidents that have ever happened. When I first started I'll go back to my educational background. So I have a master's in entrepreneurship and a undergraduate bachelor's degree in creative enterprise. So I was always very inclined about, entrepreneurship, businesses, starting up, what that looks like, and how you show up as an individual in the world of entrepreneurship. But then when I left uni, I got a job in financial services. So my first two jobs before I joined NatWest were in financial services. And then the job of the acceleration manager in the Cardiff Hub, which is actually my first job that I started with, so I'm going back to that job, came up. And it was a really lovely mix between kind of, the entrepreneurship side of things, but also still working in financial services. Within everything that I do, it's always been underpinned by inclusion because I'm from Zimbabwe myself originally. I grew up in Ireland and then I went to school in Guernsey in the Channel Islands and then went to a few different cities for university across the UK. So I've always had experiences of inclusion when it goes right and inclusion when it goes wrong. So in every single thing that I've done in my professional career, I've always tried to bring out kind of elements of inclusion and, talking about my own lived experience for the benefit of others. So all of that put together then led me to applying for my current job that I'm working in right now. And same thing again, it's because I've been working on some side projects around inclusion for the Cardiff Hub of the NatWest Accelerator. A couple of my colleagues saw the job posting and they thought, this has your name written all over it. And I remember thinking, I don't know, I'm not sure. But I applied for it anyway, got it, and the rest is history.
And in your whole journey, have you faced any, barriers yourself that, maybe motivated you to,
Where do you want me to start? Yes, I have faced barriers, and it's interesting because it's actually been on both ends of the scale. So I'll start with barriers personally for me as an individual. And I think because I'm, a multicultural individual who's grown up in quite a few different places, I've always found that completely finding my own space within the Zimbabwean community has been quite difficult because when I'm around other Zimbabwean people, I don't act in the way that they would expect me to act, and I don't, subscribe to some of the cultural, norms that we have in the community. They're not good or bad, it's just that, that's how the community is. So on that front, I face barriers where people are like, no, you can't be from Zimbabwe, or like, we don't really want to hang out with you. And also even within my own family as well, even things like, when we're very humble and down to earth people. And when I'm talking about my achievements, celebrating, people are like, oh my goodness, how could you possibly, so definitely that. And then I've also faced barriers on the other side as well, from the world around me. I think that there are perceptions about, if you're from an ethnic minority community, automatically that means disadvantage, automatically that means, well, maybe you don't get it as much as everyone else does, or you need help. That's the big one. People are like, oh, how can I help you? I'm like, it's okay, I'm all right. So I think I've also had to really carefully craft my personal brand in a way that showcases the best of who I am, showcases the best of the things that I love about my heritage, but also not alienating anyone who maybe isn't as familiar with, some of the nuances that are prevalent amongst all ethnic minority communities, not just the Zimbabwean community. So it's that thing of, perception versus reality. And I have found that in certain situations, even though I've tried my best to, work hard, be a team player, kind of, be very upfront when there are things that I don't understand, sometimes it's still been spun into, that's your problem, or, that's why you haven't got this position or something like that, because it's just always at odds with each other.
And you mentioned in like your culture is like downplay your achievements and don't shout about it. But I feel like it's so important nowadays to shout about your wins, because that's how you get your name out there, your brand, get the recognition for the hard work you put in. So why do you think there is that within the culture that it's like, don't shout about your wins, just work hard, do your thing, but be humble about it?
I mean, there's a lot of ways that I could answer that question. I think, like I said, sometimes things just are what they are. Sometimes it is what it is. And that's the way, a certain culture has been constructed. And like I said, it's not good or bad. It's just the heritage, that I come from. But if I was to go deeper and scratch beneath the surface of that, so taking my family as an example. So like I say, we moved to Ireland before we then moved to Guernsey, and then I moved to the UK. My mum moved back to mainland first before I did. And I think if I look at my mum's time as, a single parent and, trying to maintain those bonds with Zimbabwe for her children's sake, and, being probably one of the first Black people in a lot of spaces, whether that's workplaces, whether that's geographical places, I think that she, my parents' generation in general would have been in survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, it's more like, just do what you need to do, don't ruffle any feathers, just get on with it, and, don't complain or anything like that. So I think when I look at my generation, or our generation of kind of, second generation people who have come from, different nations, I feel like that sentiment is still being passed on, where people are still in survival mode, in that mindset of, oh my gosh, you absolutely cannot make any noise, or, just fit in rather than stand out. So I think that's partly it as well, because we're now coming out of, going from surviving to thriving. The mindset of just being and surviving is still there. And it's that thing of then, when you talk about your wins and when you talk about, what's gone well, you're almost challenging that mindset, or challenging kind of, where we come from as a family or a generation. So that's my take on it, I'd say.
Yeah. And would you say it's fair to say that there's a lot more equal opportunity now compared to, obviously, if we look back at our parents, their mindset on, the world is just do what you need, just work hard, and, but there's a lot of people that might say, because I'm from a certain background, I don't have the same opportunities, it's so hard for me. Do you think that's the case, or do you think that sometimes you have to be a little bit open-minded and put the work in?
I think it depends on what space we're talking about. So I'll stick to what I know rather than try to talk about everything. And I'll dissect it into two bits, as on an individual level from what I've seen and from what I've experienced, but also on an entrepreneurial level as well. So I'll start with the entrepreneurship side of things. So there's a report called the Time to Change report that was published by Aston University's Center for Research in Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship. It never gets easier every time I say it. And we actually collaborated with Prem at Aston University as, NatWest. And it was all about, characterizing the ethnic minority business landscape within the UK. What does it look like? Where are those barriers? But also where are those opportunities and what's going well? And I think one of the main headlines that came out of that report was actually, it's bittersweet, shall I say, because on one hand, it talked about how there's no lack of ambition when it comes to our ethnic minority-owned businesses in the UK. But then on the other hand, it talks about how, a lot of the respondents within that report found that, things like racism or, discrimination or, like I say, that prejudice side of things affected their entrepreneurial journeys. So, the report talks about how if we better support ethnic minority-owned businesses across the UK, we can, sorry, I always get this wrong, not triple, quadruple the annual contribution of ethnic minority-owned businesses to the economy on a yearly basis. So when you hear things like that, I think it brings it to light that maybe there are equal opportunities, but the access to those opportunities is what's not equal when we talk about entrepreneurship. And I think maybe that's where, a lot of impact can be achieved around, straightforward things like, for example, is it a standard that there are, documents available in different languages, or, is it a standard that actually, when we talk about jargon, for example, across the whole sector within business support and finance, are we making sure that we're properly explaining it? And, things like attitudes to debt as well across, a lot of ethnic minority communities, are we making sure that we're nurturing people enough so that they feel the freedom to, consider debt as a way to finance their business? So I think when you look at that, the bottom line of all of that is, like I say, there's no lack of ambition, but it's just more the access to the opportunities. Maybe we just need to level the playing field on that front. Mm-hmm. Individual-wise, it's difficult to say. I think, you do. In anything in life, you always have to be someone who kind of goes for what you want, well, in my opinion. Anyway, otherwise, things maybe don't happen in the way that we imagine them. But what I would say is there are still some factors which do affect how, for example, CVs are, perceived, or if someone's, from a culture where they use particularly colorful language, for example, then all of a sudden that person is perceived as being unserious, or, so I think there's also that as well, where we need to look at not necessarily the opportunities for individuals, but again, like I said, the people and the systems behind them. If there's a system that, allows an unequal opportunity to thrive, then we need to look at dismantling that system. So it's also thinking about, yes, it's the day-to-day, but then it's also the structure of the space that we're in as well for individuals to build that inclusive environment that also needs to kind of shift.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's more of, people are seeing more similar faces, familiar faces in these roles, achieving, on high levels. So it makes it more, obtainable for them. Yeah. So when they see someone, let's say a black CEO, they're like, okay, so, I can actually achieve that. But it's just definitely how. And, like you've managed these, the business inclusion programs. Those are, those programs allow these individuals to see, beyond their limited beliefs. And
definitely.
And, when you do run these programs, what is like a reoccurring theme that you see in their belief systems?
I think the big one really is just like I said, a reluctance to trust financial services providers in general. And again, coming back to the Time to Change report, one of the, theories around why that is because of historical, relationships with financial services. So when you think about, say, 20, 30, 50, however many years ago, financial services providers in general, kind of, encompassing the whole sector, how they would have interacted with ethnic minority communities would not be the same now. And I think there is kind of that generational messaging, like what I was talking about before, around how, it's been passed on through generations, and then there's just a automatic perception that, the bank is not to be trusted. And I'm not trying to, diminish anyone's lived experience. I'm sure there are situations where actually, there have been people or entrepreneurs who haven't had a positive experience, with any business support provider or any financial services provider. But then I think where it becomes more important is for business support providers and financial services organizations to not assume that we're all starting from the same starting point. Mm-hmm. When we talk about, entrepreneurs from diverse backgrounds, not just to do with ethnicity, but diversity in general, I would imagine that, their lived experience up until that time when they start interacting with, the bank or the accelerators or whoever else, has already had an influence on how they're, perceiving their interaction with financial services providers. So I think it's that thing around, how do we not assume that, everyone is perceiving everything from the same mindset, but then also how do you make sure that, the intentions of financial services providers are clearly communicated, so that we don't inadvertently keep contributing to that mindset of, oh, can I trust the bank? Or
yeah. And there's a lot of people that might say, because my name sounds like this, when I apply for a loan, it's very unlikely that I'm going to get approved. What would you say to that, having worked at NatWest?
Yeah.
Is that true? Is that a myth? Like, because people are so, going into this so negative, they have that mindset that I'm probably not going to get approved because my name's like this. When I fill that form out and I put I'm from a African, Asian background, it's automatically going to flag me as a no. Would you say that's...
you know what? I actually don't know, because I'm not involved in the lending side of things, but from the snippets that I've had with, conversations from people who are more involved in that side, so I know for a fact that, for example, at the bank, we don't collect ethnicity data on anything, any of our core products and services, we don't, simply because that there is that whole, wanting to remove as much reluctance amongst our customer bases as possible. I mean, even if, ethnicity data was collected, I can't imagine that it would, impact in that way, especially in the world that we live in now. I think a lot of things are actually just done by a computer, so I don't know if there's much chance of there being an interaction with a human in those spaces. I guess there are two different elements to kind of I suppose what banks do these days, because with a lot of banks that you'll see on the high street, they have, like I say, their core products and services, what they do as a traditional bank, and then they've got like the added on, aspects of what they do as well. So it's really difficult to try and characterize and say all the processes work like this, because nowadays you'll find that a lot of banks also offer, financial education programs, for example. They also offer things like accelerators, business incubation programs. So it's really difficult to, I guess, put it all into one box. But what I would say to people, I guess, who have that perception is, you know what, if in the world of entrepreneurship, there are going to be a lot of no's, so don't ever take it personally. And, if it is a case where someone feels like, okay, well, it's something to do with them as an individual, then point it out, have the courage to, have those uncomfortable conversations and get to the bottom of it, because you never know, you could be breaking down the barrier for the next person who's going to, walk through the doors after you do. So that's probably what I would say.
So as the business inclusion program manager at NatWest, what are, some of the questions you get asked, very common questions that you see, and, situations you find people are taking those?
I mean, the main one is around funding, definitely. I think a lot of people are looking for funding, not just to do with debt finance, but funding in general, whether that's grants, whether that's tendering for contracts. So that's the biggest one. Another big one I would say is access to networks. So one of the things that I like to do in my role is I talk about how to add value to everyone's entrepreneurial journey. So it's not just about what can we do as a financial services provider, or what can we do as the accelerator, but actually what can I do as an individual to also open doors, or, share information or share knowledge. So I'd say definitely kind of, access to networks about, who do people need to speak to within organizations who are going to be the decision makers around adding a company to a supply chain, for example, or, which support organizations are the ones that can enable a company to start exporting internationally. So it's also thinking about, opening up those networks, opening up those doors. And then what's the third one? I'd say the third most common question, it's probably around, like I say, the NatWest Accelerator, what it does, what it's all about, and what benefits people can get out of it. So I think those are probably the top three.
The next thing I'll talk about is a lot of businesses and organizations, love to push that we're diverse, we're all inclusive, but not a lot actually, implement it into the business. But, it's very common now that businesses just love to put it on their, their websites or their adverts. What does, real inclusion in business look like to you?
I think real inclusion in business to me looks like, first and foremost, not having a one-size-fits-all definition of what diversity is. And the reason I say that is because when you think about, let's talk about ethnic diversity. When you think about the ethnic diversity you find in London, that's going to be so different to what you find in Manchester. It's going to be so different to what you find in Cardiff, and it will be different to what you find in other parts of the world, as well as, just across the UK. So I think the first thing is, being very specific to the audience that the organization is serving, both internally and externally, and becoming familiar with, who they're actually talking about when they talk about their diverse audiences. And then the other thing as well, I think as well, is just inclusion as a standard rather than an exception. So, a group of people who are able to have those difficult conversations with each other, who are able to agree to disagree when there are, when maybe, certain cultures or beliefs don't see eye to eye, it's actually okay to just, have differences in opinions and be in an environment where you feel safe enough to be able to share that. And I think also, as well, it's thinking about allyship as well as diversity. Sometimes there might not be the presence of the diverse audience that a company wants to serve, whether that's ethnicity, whether that's gender, neurodiversity, whatever the case may be. So it's also thinking about, okay, in the absence of those voices around the table, are we also still championing the conversation on behalf of those people, rather than just leaving it up to the people who belong to that community to raise awareness and to champion inclusion from that front. So I think I'd say allyship goes hand in hand with inclusion. For me.
Yeah. And what would you say some of the characteristics you've had, and things you've done that have allowed you to kind of be where you are now in your position?
Okay, that's a big question. I'd say it probably is. Okay, I don't want to say overcoming fear, because I always, there's situations where I'm like, oh my goodness, my heart is pounding. On the outside, I'm cool, calm, and collected, but on the inside, I'm freaking out. So what I would say is not necessarily facing my fears, but just making friends with the idea that, there will be some situations where I'm scared or I don't know how to particularly respond, but just being able to sit with that uncomfortable feeling and being able to sit with that fear rather than just activating my fight or flight and, exiting that situation. So I think the first thing is, just working through, those moments and just being like, you know what, it's okay. Something I always tell myself is, as long as I'm alive and as long as I have my family, anything else, it's just a bonus. So whenever something scares me, I just remind myself of, what are those true fundamentals of what matters to me and what's important to me. And unless something is, putting those fundamentals at risk, then actually, let me just do it and see what happens. And then also, I think the other thing as well is, like I said, just being able to accept that sometimes things are what they are. And sometimes, as individuals, genuinely, there are some situations where something can be bigger than us as an individual. And maybe you need to bring in collaborators, or maybe you need to, speak to a different set of stakeholders who have an influence on the outcome of that situation. So I would say for me, it's just knowing that it is what it is. And then to completely contradict that as well, it's being able to read the environment that you're in. I think there are a lot of unspoken rules, and there are a lot of ways in which things operate, which people don't necessarily say out loud. But if you can be observant and if you can learn your environment, that will help in terms of how you can influence others to get on board with what you're trying to champion. But also it can help to spend your energy wisely on the areas that will actually have the most impact, rather than just trying to do everything and being everything for everyone. And I don't mean that as in, you've got to change who you are to fit into the environment around you. What I mean is, you've got to find those pockets of where who you are really fit in and maximize those opportunities, rather than just trying to speak to someone who has already made their decision, or trying to change something from the outside, when actually what you need to do is speak to people on the inside. So that's what I mean by learning my environment and just being able to navigate it in that way.
Mm-hmm. And it comes back to, like you mentioned, sometimes not fitting in, like with family, and they're like, you're not, but there's finding that right balance of being yourself, but then knowing when to fit in with, like you said, know your audience and know your crowd. Obviously staying true to what you believe, and not letting that be shifted. So another thing, you obviously, you're a speaker as well, where you share knowledge. Those events where there's like-minded people present, how important would you say it is? As a startup, as a small business, you could be an entrepreneur, can be quite lonely. And all those beliefs in your head. But then when you see other people in the same boat, it gets a little bit more, okay, so there's 10 other people in the room that are in a similar situation as me. How important would you say it is to show up to those kind of events and put yourself out there?
Oh, I think it's so important. It's so important because there's a lot of value in, like you say, being around like-minded people. But similarly, there's a lot of value in being around people who don't see it the same way as you do, because that is when you get those bright sparks of those new ideas, and you're like, oh my goodness, that's so genius, I didn't think of that before. But also it helps to kick the tires on your business, because I think, and I speak from personal experience, from my own, building my own kind of value proposition for my business. And, a lot of the time as entrepreneurs, we can tend to fall in love with the idea rather than falling in love with building a viable business and building a viable, kind of product or service. So I think sometimes it's super important to be around other people who can ask those questions and who can, spot those blind spots that maybe you haven't as an entrepreneur. But also people who can motivate you to, explain the idea better. If people don't get it, then actually, that's a really good way to assess, how well you're explaining your business, what you're doing with it, and whether or not it's got, it's got a viable kind of, solution for, your target audience. So it's really important to show up. And I think one thing as well is around that whole networking piece. I have found that in my entrepreneurial journey, and to a certain extent my professional career as well, sometimes it's the people you least expect who become those allies or who become those collaborators. And also people really appreciate, that human interaction. So it doesn't help to just go up to someone and say, oh, hi, I sell this, this, and this, and my business does this. Do you want to become a customer? Actually getting to know them as an individual, asking them about their background, what's important to them, sharing information about you as a human really can go a long way. So when you have those more authentic interactions with people, you'll find that those are the people who are most likely to show up in future for your business. When you eventually, launch that new product, they'll be like, oh, we had a really lovely conversation that time at that event. Oh my gosh, I'm definitely going to buy from you, or I'm definitely going to recommend you to my friends. So I think it's really important to show up in those spaces, because you just never know who you're going to come across, and you don't know how they will show up again in the future after you kind of, showing the most authentic version of yourself as well.
Yeah. And I see a lot of that actually with Trampoline's programs. So once the cohort kind of meet each other, they start seeing that this person can help me with this, or they start hearing different advice from each other. So as much as they're learning from the program itself, they're learning a lot from each other's answers. And there's a lot of people that aren't confident enough to ask questions. Like they don't want to put their hand up, or someone else might ask that question.
Yeah.
But then being present in that session allowed them to get the answer to something that was too worried to be. They might be, is it a stupid question, or did they realize that that other business owner in this room, he's in the same situation, or she. So you opened a charity when you were 17, is that right? So 17-year-old Blessing compared to now, would you say you was the same? Like, because I can see you quite outgoing and confident now. Was 17-year-old Blessing the same, or?
You know what? I think in a different way though. I was, to be honest, I had a bit of a rebellious phase. So when I was 17, I was probably like, not a care in the world, and, just kind of following this path of wanting to try new things and, find my place in the world and, have all those adventures. But I think the biggest change that I would say from 17-year-old me to now is I'm more conscious of the results of, my experiments. I'm more conscious of, my adventures. So, I'm a lot more considerate of kind of, the impact of what I'm doing to the people around me. Whereas like when I was 17, I was like, oh, whatever, I'll just do what I want. And, you can just live with it. So I'd say that's it. But I still haven't lost my sense of, curiosity. I'm always the person in any sort of like team meeting or workshop. I'm always the one who asks the most questions, because I love to just process things, and I love to think about, okay, we're doing something in this way, but what about if we can do it in another way? And, is there anything that we're missing? But I would say also, I think I work at a slower pace. Although I still work at quite a fast pace anyway, but before I'd be like, yeah, better do this and this and this and finish this and stop this. But now I'm more like thinking about, how to learn from the process, thinking about, okay, if something has gone well, what can I learn from that? And how do I build that into the process of how I run my life? And, what can I learn from that? Or if it hasn't gone well, where do I need to tweak? What information do I need to gather? Or what skills do I need to learn? So I think I'm different in my approach, in the sense of I'm now very much, taking the world in as much as putting stuff out into the world.
And I think for most of us, we're a lot more curious when we're younger. The amount of risk you can take on as well, because you don't know anything, so there's no harm in trying. But I think that's always the case. No matter how far you're on your journey, like you've got to take that risk in order for there to be some level of reward. But it's just measured. Like,
exactly. Method to the madness that I always call it.
So you're not just blindly doing stuff now, because obviously you've gained all that knowledge, so you can kind of, before you jump into anything, you can make a good decision on it. So like, when you have a bad day and your thoughts get take over. Why am I speaking at this event? Why should they listen to me? Do you ever have those days where you're questioning, am I the right person to be giving advice on, this topic, or are there days like that?
Oh, absolutely. Often. But I think, again, this comes back to like what I said around, being comfortable with that sense of being uncomfortable. So yes, of course, it's good to, constantly scrutinize and constantly review and say, okay, am I the right person to speak about this? But when I counter those thoughts, I think about all of us as individuals are unique in the sense of, no one's lived exactly the same life as I have or as you have. So actually anything I tell people about me personally and the things that I believe in is new and valuable information because they haven't, seen life through the lens that I've seen it. And also I think as well, like I said, it's okay to just say, I don't know, or it's okay to, put your hands up and be honest with your audience around, what you're really confident in knowing, and the things that maybe you aren't as familiar with as well. But also, I think I always ask myself, if there's ever a situation where I feel like I'm not the right person to be talking about this, or I don't know much about this topic, I also add on another question to think, okay, is it something that I do want to know about, or am I okay with not knowing about it? So if it is something I do want to know about, then I go and learn that information, or I go and find out, or I go and, do a mini experiment around it so that I don't end up almost like setting myself up for failure. Because, if I'm seeing that, often I don't know the answer to something, or I'm not comfortable talking about it, then that also should be a reflection of, the knowledge that I have and whether or not I'm equipped enough to be in the space that I'm in. And if I'm not, then that's a problem. So I always ask myself around, okay, this thing that I don't know, or this thing I'm not, familiar with, should I know it, or is it something that fits in with all of the other knowledge that I do know? And if it is, I'll learn it. If it's not, then I just make peace with it and lead with authenticity and lead with the story of me as an individual rather than me trying to talk about something in a way that won't be authentic and relatable.
Yeah, I think it's always more difficult to talk about something you don't genuinely care about. Like if you have a passion for it, it just comes out itself, and you can talk about it for days, and because you're so passionate about it. But yeah, like you mentioned, keeping it authentic. So having worked in business inclusion, you deliver programs. Is there something that stands out to you that is something that you talk about, but is still not actually being, taken action on within business inclusion?
You mean as in within what entrepreneurs can do, or you mean as in like the work that I do and the opportunities there?
So in terms of barriers, so barriers you see that are still there, but that as much as you're talking about it, it's not really being taken action on, if that makes sense.
Oh, another great question. Let me think about that one. I think it sounds so simple, but actually I feel like, again, it could be so impactful. It is this whole concept of, us as individuals, but also representatives of organizations, literally having those difficult conversations. And, little things like, okay, it's not a little thing, actually, it's a big thing. So, for example, someone walks into a branch, or someone, approaches the accelerator, or whatever the case is, asking the question of, I'm so sorry, I've never come across your name before, would you mind just letting me know how you would pronounce it? That's like a huge thing, that can go a long way for someone. Or even talking about, is there anything else that we can do to make this environment more inclusive? And, talking about, for example, during Ramadan, not having like information intensive meetings, like because people will be fasting and they're not, kind of concentrating at the same level as they would be outside of Ramadan. So it's like little things like those that sound simple, but actually in the big picture scheme of things, it can actually have a really big impact on how much people feel welcomed and, connected to the environment that they're in. I think it would be so powerful if we could have those conversations, ask those questions, but also make the environment feel safe enough for someone to actually answer honestly, to be like, yeah, you know what, you've actually been pronouncing my name wrong for the last year. Yeah. I'm so glad you asked. And people feeling like they're not going to be looked at differently, or they're not going to get in trouble for saying that, because I really think there's so much more that we could achieve if it was like that, on a more consistent level. It's happening in pockets, but I think it needs to happen on organization-wide levels, and it needs to happen on industry-wide levels for us to really see the shift. And also, I think, as much as I can talk about statistics from the Time to Change report, or as much as we can talk about research, or we can talk about, insights that I've heard from someone else, it's never going to be the same as that person delivering that message, themselves. And I think there's a lot of power in human storytelling. And imagine, I've seen it where, so I run cultural literacy workshops as part of my role at the bank, which again was just something that I thought about one day, but now it's turned into this really, something I'm quite proud of actually. But I see it when, we're having those conversations, and I start sharing the, stats and the research and, the impact that it has on individuals. And it's almost like a turning point. It's like a transformation when people in teams start talking about, oh yeah, I've had this experience, and this morning someone shouted a racial slur at me when I was walking to work, and and then you see other people around them almost like have like a penny drop moment of like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize, or actually that's a really good point, or I've never thought about that before. And then you talk to those people, say like 3, 6, 12 months down the line, and they start telling you about how, they have more inclusion-focused conversations in their teams, or, their people managers are now being more inclusive around, the times of the day that they have, networking things, and all of those, changes start to come about. But if that conversation had not been started, and if that safe environment hadn't been created, and if people didn't feel the courage to ask those questions, you do wonder as to whether, what of those changes would have come about. So I think that's, for me, the big thing is just, having those uncomfortable conversations and just being honest about it as well. Not everyone knows everything, and that's fine. And not everyone agrees with everything, and that's fine too. But the more we shy away from it, the more things just happen beneath the surface, and you're actually, become those barriers that are being broken down, and things that we can talk about we're doing as like, impactful changes.
And I feel like it's very easy to just let it go and just overlook it. If a manager says your name wrong, it's like, it's fine, it's not going to impact my work. And then, a year goes by and they're still calling you by the wrong name. But then, like you mentioned, there's the deeper level of understanding people's cultures. That, everyone's from different walks of life. You're not going to understand it necessarily. You might not agree with it. But someone might say, "But why do I have to?" That's their way. Like, why should it affect the way we operate within the business? So, and obviously, there's an element of time that will be taken away if you're running. You're taking out time to educate everyone on, guys, look, this is how this person's culture works and that, so we need to be more inclusive. How would you say businesses could, take small steps into kind of, having those conversations? Because like telling your manager that's not how you pronounce my name, that's a small step, but that, on the bigger scale of, I need to take a day off today because it's a religious day, or, so that everyone understands, and it's not, why is she or he not here today? I don't care if, how can businesses kind of implement that in small steps so that everyone is on the same page?
I think it's a matter of speaking everyone's language and not waiting until someone feels like okay, I can't take this anymore, so I'm just going to have to ask, or I'm just going to have to say it. So I'll come back to my first point. So my first point around speaking everyone's language, right? In every business, generally speaking, you'll have functions of finance, operations, HR, all the different areas, and they all look at things very differently. For example, finance people are just like, what's the bottom line of the business? Are we making money? Are we going to get in trouble? Whereas, thinking about HR, they look at it from the point of view of, okay, what's the workforce saying? Are they okay? What are the risks that we need to be aware of? And actually, so one really good example of how to speak everyone's language is there's a book that I'm reading about sales in a business. And it talks about how, as an entrepreneur, you need to think about, how you're spending your time. And the author talks about, okay, so, you make a list of all the things that take up most of your time. And say, for example, if cleaning is one of them, don't look at it as, I need to get a cleaner and it's going to cost me £40 per hour. Look at it as, I need to get a cleaner and it's going to save me however much, an hour costs in your business. Mm-hmm. So there's also thinking about, right, okay, how do I speak the language of people? So when we talk about, finance, for example, we know that, diversity brings diversity of thought into businesses. That means that, we are more inclusive of our customer bases. That means, we can also find different ways of doing things within the business. So, speaking the language of finance, actually, talking about this is important for us to be inclusive of our workforce because these are the outputs that we're going to achieve. When we talk about, say, for example, HR, they're thinking, okay, is everyone okay? And we're actually saying we need to be inclusive of people so that we can mitigate against risks of, whatever the case may be, whether it's legal action further down the line or, us being in line with the benchmark of the industry. So that's what I mean by speaking the language of people, where you're delivering the same message, but just using different ways of, emphasizing why it's important to be inclusive of everyone. Yeah. But also, like I say as well, the second point around, see, now I forgot what I was saying. What was the second one I was talking about? Speaking everyone's language. And, oh yes, that's it. Not waiting until people feel the need to ask. Mm-hmm. Same thing again. What can we do as a standard to always be inclusive? So if we're designing a benefits package for our employees, are we making sure that it's not just centered around the assumption that everyone is going to want a case of wine as a gift for their performance, a good performance? What if there's other things as well that people want? Things like holidays. A lot of companies do those incentives. For example, you can take a mental health day, you can take a day off for your birthday, obviously, the things like Christmas, Easter. What about the other religions? So can you swap out your maybe Christmas holidays for Diwali, or can you take a day off for something that's of religious or cultural significance to you as an individual that might not be to other people in the organization, instead of waiting for someone to come to you and say, oh, by the way, such and such a day every year is actually really important for me, so can I take it off? And then making them feel like they're the exception rather than they're part of the workforce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've actually experienced it because a previous company I worked at, to celebrate at the end of the month, every Friday, every last Friday of the month, they would have drinks in the office. But it excluded a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly.
Who didn't drink, for whatever reason. But it only took one person, and it wasn't the people that were actually being neglected. It was another person who said,
"Oh, I love that."
Yeah. So they said it's not really fair that they don't get anything. Why don't we do something else?
Yeah.
And they proposed, let's go paintballing instead of going for drinks. And just that one person mentioned.
See what I mean?
So
it can be so powerful.
Next thing you know, the director was looking up paintballing sessions and who wants to go here.
Love that.
So yeah, it's not necessarily just the victims of it. It's other people that can make a difference as well, because as we know, a lot of people that do face it, they don't have the voice sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's important, if you're someone who sees it, to actually speak up.
Absolutely. Yeah. I totally agree with you.
So coming back to finance, when it comes to minoritized and marginalized startups, small businesses, what would you say the barriers are in terms of finance? Because there's a lot of assumptions, like we mentioned, about because my name sounds a specific way, or because my background is this. So how could they kind of overcome those barriers? What kind of services are available out there for them that they should be taking advantage of?
I mean, there's quite a few, and also I think quite a few of those challenges are transferable to the general SME landscape, but then there are some which are more acute when you talk about, ethnic minority or just minority, owned businesses in general. So hopefully what I cover will kind of speak to covering both of those bases, but if I miss anything, then let me know.
Yeah.
I think the first thing is you've got to be very familiar with what type of finance is suitable for you as a business at that point in time. So again, banks, generally speaking, they're all regulated organizations, and in some situations it's actually, you just cannot lend to a particular type of business, whether that's to do with the revenue, the products or services that they're offering, the industry that they're in, and also thinking about, what the organization classes as what we call a risk appetite. So I think sometimes because it's not something that comes to people's mind naturally, that or actually right now maybe bank finance is not the most suitable for me, it does get mixed up in a lot of messaging, shall I say, that then again contributes to people feeling like, okay, it's something to do with them as an individual rather than their business. But on the flip side of it, like I said, I think there does need to be a bit more of clarity around, what those decision factors are, how those decisions have been come to, but also, demystifying kind of some of those barriers as well, where banks can talk about, okay, these are the things that we actually can't do as regulated organizations, and if you ever see anything that is not in line with this, then definitely, reach out to us. So I think there is that around two sides of the conversation. Just need to be clear on what banks can and can't do, but also, like I say, if a business is actually ready for debt finance, because sometimes it could be a case of, crowdfunding, or it could be a case of friends and family, or it could be a case of alternative finance providers first before them, coming to a bank. The other thing as well, I would say, is always thinking ahead with a business. So quite often I come across entrepreneurs who talk about how, they need money in the next 2 months, and you're like, oh, you probably should have thought about that like a year ago. So it's also forward planning, and thinking about, okay, how much money am I going to need? Where is that money going to come from? And what am I going to use that money for as well? Because also another kind of, big decision factor is when you talk about, looking for finance, a lot of financial services providers are going to ask, what do you want to use that money for? And if it's not anything that is going to help the business to get to its next step and just maintain kind of, the current position, more often than not, I think actually, just in general, any finance provider will probably think, oh, you've got to use the money wisely. Yeah. So really just being very clear on, okay, what's the, long-term projection of the, businesses in 12 months is long-term in this particular instance. And how do you make sure you perfectly tell the story of what you need the money for? That could be a barrier, because sometimes, as an entrepreneur, you're thinking, okay, I've definitely nailed this. And, sometimes you can assume that others can see what you see in the numbers when the information is not there. So I think it's also just about being really clear and, thinking about, that long-term kind of, process. And then I suppose the final thing is, I don't know, I think, probably, like I said, just making sure that you're approaching the appropriate organizations for what you need the money for. And I guess also listening to the feedback as well, because not that I'm saying, all feedback is valuable, because sometimes people just, want to say things for the sake of saying things.
Yeah.
But if there are maybe, other entrepreneurs in your network or people who have done what you've done and are a couple of steps ahead of you, thinking about, what knowledge they can provide in terms of you building the picture of your business financially, and thinking about how you can learn from, what feedback they have and learn from, like I said, the blind spots that they had, that can then help to break down that barrier of feeling like, you're not quite being considered in the way that you want to be considered.
Yeah.
But again, like I say, I caveat that with the fact that sometimes that actually is the case. And, you've got to make sure that your story is watertight enough to be able to further explain why, a financial services provider should see it in the same way that you see it, because not everyone is going to get it first time around. But at the same time, for you to be able to bring people along on that journey, you have to be able to know your numbers inside out, know that you're approaching the right type of, financial services provider, and know that, you've thought about it from kind of like in advance, shall I say, rather than just at that moment when you need the money is when you started to ask for it.
Yeah. And even if we take a step back, having the kind of financial literacy as well, understanding what you're applying for, what are the terms. A lot of people, anyone can go online and type in grants, but if you don't really know what they're looking for, you're going to get it's going to get declined. But if you take the time beforehand to maybe join a program, a business support program that actually teaches you these are different methods of finance that are available to you. And then a lot of business programs will actually teach you what the grants are looking for, how to fill out the form, what you need in order for them to consider you. But a lot of people are quick to play the victim, but it's like, why don't you do your research, look at what the requirements are, and see, are you even really in a position to be applying for that grant? Because it's, just applying for it and getting denied and then saying, oh, they're just denying me. But if you're sure that you make your chances as high as possible, like you mentioned, there's always the chance that sometimes they do just, decline your application. But, taking the time to actually understand, having everything in place before applying for it, it's going to make a big difference.
Absolutely, definitely. And also, like you say, spending the time now will benefit in the long run, rather than not spending the time now, but then in the long run, you also don't achieve the results that you want. So I think you're right. It is that thing of, taking the time to learn as well as, trying to achieve those results with the business. So yeah, it makes sense.
And there's a lot of thinking ahead, like you mentioned, because once you get that grant or, the loan, what are you going to do with it?
Exactly.
Firstly,
That's a big question.
What is that solely what you're relying on? Or, once that finishes, what are you going to do then?
Exactly. And how are you going to pay it back is another big question.
Exactly. And because in your startup, it's easy to say that I need finance, I need funding, that's my biggest thing, but you're missing so many other elements that could be, out of place. But yes, it's something that you need to definitely prep for. Like the programs now, Trampoline's been running 2 programs. At the end of it, there's the opportunity to apply for 2 grants, one to 2K, one to 5K. So, but in that process, they will get the understanding of what needs to be in place. It's not just a matter of Trampoline's got this grant, here you go, you can apply for it, good luck. It's more of, this is what they'll be looking for, take your time, don't rush it, make a draft of it, have someone review it who's probably, been approved before. So again, it comes back to looking at the bigger picture, not just, oh, I need finance, I need it. That's it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
I totally agree.
With this, that you get a program and you're going to have access to a network, and someone in the room might be like, "Oh, I actually got finance through this method, so why don't you try that?" But again, it's showing up, which is
It is. There's a lot. Do you know what? I think being an entrepreneur is really demanding. There's so much that you've got to keep your eye on, so much that you've got to think about, so much that you have to respond to, especially those kind of new experiences that you've never been in before. And you're like, oh, okay, now I have to find an answer for this. So yeah, there's a lot. And I think the first step is always, the most commendable, because I'm sure a lot of us, have ideas. I'm sure a lot of us, have dreams of starting a business one day, but not everyone actually brings that to life, and not everyone takes that leap of faith. So yeah, I think it's one of those where, everyone's just doing their best, and it could be worse.
And I think a lot of people, once they start a business and realize the work that is required,
right,
then they turn around and say, maybe it's not for me.
Exactly, which is fine too.
But there's some people that are just wired different, and they just keep going obstacle after obstacle until they do land, that one business that does work.
Exactly.
So I think that's another thing, that you need to know who you are. And like I said, when you're younger, it's easier to take those risks and be a little bit more carefree. As it goes, you start making more calculated. Yeah. So, we are coming up to the end of the podcast. We like to end with some quick fire questions. So So the first one is best piece of advice you've ever received. Could be general.
Best piece of advice I've ever received. Don't try and be everything for everyone.
It's powerful. So the next one is, what's your favorite part about the work that you do?
The people who I work alongside, and the people who I get to meet, all the entrepreneurs, all the stakeholders that we work with. Just constantly learning new information, having my mind blown, and then I'm like, oh, I thought I knew it all, but I didn't. So definitely the people, I'd say.
And last question, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Again, good question. Where do I see myself in 5 years? I don't know. I feel like the answer changes on a daily basis. I see myself, regardless of work and the material things, I see myself somewhere where I've got time freedom. So freedom to really spend my time on everything that I really want to spend my time on. And I see myself getting to a stage where I'm starting to see the results of my legacy come to life. Everything that I've been doing so far has been with the aim of building a legacy, because I feel like, because of the upbringing that I had, I never had role models who absolutely got it in terms of the experiences that I was having, in terms of the challenges and the opportunities. So I'm always very motivated by being that person for, other people, or the generation kind of coming up, after me. So like I say, anything I do is always around building a legacy. Just, making my presence felt in a way that I don't necessarily have to be there physically, but people can feel like, oh, what, Blessing did that, and that's really cool. So hopefully in 5 years' time, all of these wonderful things will start to come to life. I can feel pride in knowing that I didn't just exist on this earth to just exist. I actually have been living a life. And hopefully it can avoid someone else feeling the feelings that I felt on my down days when I was growing up. So whatever that might look like, whether that's me being the CEO of a FTSE 100 company, you know what, I would say no. Whether that's me building my business and going completely self-employed, that's great too. Or whether that's actually, going down a completely different path, then yeah. But whatever it looks like needs to have those elements in it.
Sounds good. So that is the end of the podcast. Again, thank you for
taking having me.
Of course. Thanks for taking the time to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you.